Hello, this is the headlining news across the East African region. Now on August 7th, 1998, a new future of world politics, security and even finance was triggered in the East African capitals. The American embassies of Nairobi and Dar es Salaam were blown up by terrorist bombs in the mid-morning, but the blast meant for Kampala was averted due to heightened vigilance, inspired by smaller bombs that had gone off during the World Cup final match, incidentally won by France then. With those bombs in East Africa, the Al-Qaeda led by Osama bin Laden announced its arrival on a global scale 3 years before they blew up New York's World Trade Center. 20 years later today, the world has changed irreversibly as the international community rallied behind the American-led war on terror. From political, military operations around the globe, everything changed. New Vision TV outlines how those bombings changed not only all the countries of East Africa, but the way the entire world does business. When Osama bin Laden was expelled from Saudi Arabia in 1992, he relocated to Sudan under the guise of building roads and sponsoring agricultural projects and set up base until 1996. He was expelled due to pressure from the US, who actually bombed armament factories in Sudan. Just before the strike, the last person the United States Commander-in-Chief, President Bill Clinton, called was Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni. Osama relocated to Afghanistan and sped off his plans to hit the East African allies of America. On August 7, 1998, he did it by pulling off the simultaneous bombing of the US embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. The blast intended for Kampala was averted due to heightened vigilance in Kampala, inspired by smaller bombings that killed a few people on Kampala Road and in Makindye during the World Cup final match that year. The global war on terror had started. With the blowing up of the East African embassies, Osama succeeded in luring the US to Afghanistan, where he had established the largest base of Al-Qaeda, with the Taliban extremes in charge of the country. As the conflict in Afghanistan raged, Al-Qaeda staged the worst terrorist ever on September 11, 2001 by hijacking 4 larger passenger planes and blowing up the World Trade Center Twin Towers with them. The 2 other planes crashed before hitting the Pentagon and the White House. 3,000 people were killed, including nearly 300 police and firefighting personnel. The hunt for terrorists intensified globally, but smaller jihadist groups had become inspired by the Al-Qaeda Bora attacks, and in Eastern Africa, these included Al-Shabaab in Somalia and Jamil Mukulu's ADF in Uganda. Somalia had become stateless, and the growth of Al-Shabaab was rapid and intensive. The African Union sanctioned a peace-building mission, and Uganda offered to pioneer the effort. The UPDF was first to put boots on the ground, followed by Burundi. Kenya did not immediately enter Somalia since they share a common border with a huge Somali population in Kenya, factors that would disqualify their intervention. But as the war on Al-Shabaab intensified, Kenya also entered Somalia to debt. Rwanda too, with its history, despite meager resources, has become a major contributor to peace-building efforts and is now the 5th largest contributor of personnel operating in Sudan's Darfur, South Sudan, Central African Republic, and Mali. Where Rwanda Defense Forces go to build peace, they also export the spirit of communal work known as Umuganda. The war on terror was to become multi-dimensional, with millions of people crossing frontiers and 20,000 planes to the air every day. The travel industry had to change forever. Security is now paramount. The global investment in airport and border security is unprecedented, with biometric scanners connected to the global security systems now used in the remotest corners of the world. But the early strikes in East Africa taught the world's top security systems that terrorists no longer need to transport weapons to the targeted countries. Rather, they acquire resources in the target areas and use those to strike. What, however, they must move is money. And so the anti-money laundering legislations became a global imperative, and most countries have passed them. The negative off-spin of these is that corrupt officials and leaders in poor countries are now constrained to move stolen money to banks abroad, and even internally, as red flags are raised when huge sums are moved. This has led local thieves in poor countries to drive up property prices as they hide the stolen loot in buying land and buildings. As a result, the finance markets have become distorted as properties cannot recover the purchase value from dozens of years' rent. Although Osama bin Laden was killed 7 years ago under the command of an East African American commander-in-chief of the USA, Barack Obama, his negative impact on the region is still far from over. That was the headlining news across the East African region.